The crystal glasses clinked as Elizabeth Winters raised her hand for another toast at her immaculate Upper East Side dining room. "To my brilliant son Thomas," she announced, her voice carrying that particular tone of aristocratic certainty, "for finally making full partner at Goldman Sachs." I sat quietly in my wrinkled scrubs, having come straight from my night shift at Metropolitan Memorial Hospital. "My name is Grace Chen, and to my mother-in-law." I was nothing more than the night nurse who had somehow tracked her precious son into marriage. What she didn't know was that tomorrow morning I would become her boss. "Grace, dear," Elizabeth's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Couldn't you have at least changed before coming to a family dinner? Those scrubs are hardly appropriate for a Winters family gathering." I could feel Thomas tense beside me. "Mom, Grace came straight from saving lives in the ER. I think we can forgive her attire." "Saving lives?" Elizabeth laughed, sharing a knowing look with her country club friends around the table. "Please, Thomas." She hands out aspirin and changes bedpans. "Let's not exaggerate." If she only knew that while working those night shifts, I'd been orchestrating the largest hospital acquisition in New York's history. My grandfather's healthcare company, which I'd inherited last year, had just completed a $2 billion takeover of the entire Metropolitan Hospital system, including the flagship hospital where Elizabeth reigned as chief of surgery. "Actually," I said softly, "I was assisting in an emergency thoracotomy tonight." The patient pulled through. Elizabeth waved her hand dismissively. "Anyone can assist. It takes real skill to lead a surgical department. Not that you'll ever know anything about that." I thought about the reports on my desk detailing Elizabeth's department's declining success rates, the complaints about her favoritism, the documentation of procedures billed but never performed. All evidence I gathered during my meaningless night shifts. "More wine, Grace?" Thomas's sister Amanda offered, trying to break the tension. She, at least, had always been kind to me. "No, thank you," I declined politely. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Elizabeth couldn't resist. "Oh? Is there a bed-making seminar at the hospital?" The table tittered with polite laughter. I caught Thomas's father, Richard, giving his wife a warning look. He'd always seemed uncomfortable with her treatment of me, though he never openly disagreed. "Something like that," I replied, thinking of the board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. where the new ownership would be announced. I'd met Thomas 2 years ago when he came to the ER with a minor injury. Unlike his mother, he saw past titles and status. He fell in love with me, not my family's wealth or connections. In fact, I'd never told him about my inheritance or my grandfather's company. Like Elizabeth, he thought I was just a dedicated nurse working night shifts to help pay off student loans. "I still don't understand," Elizabeth continued, warming to her favorite topic, "why you insist on working those horrible night shifts. Thomas makes more than enough to support you. Unless," her eyes narrowed, "you're setting aside a little nest egg in case things don't work out." "Mom." Thomas protested, but she wasn't finished. "It's a valid concern, darling. The Winters family has certain standards, certain expectations, and frankly, a night nurse who can't even dress properly for dinner hardly meets them." I thought about my grandfather's last words to me. "Watch how people treat those they think are beneath them. It reveals their true character." He'd built his healthcare empire from nothing, starting as a hospital janitor while putting himself through medical school. "I just believe in earning my own way," I said quietly. Elizabeth snorted. "Earning? Please. Do you know what Thomas's bonus was this year? More than you'll make in a decade of changing bedpans." I did know, actually. Just as I knew that Metropolitan Memorial's surgical department under Elizabeth's leadership had the highest mortality rate in the city, a fact carefully hidden from public records but obvious to anyone with access to the real data. Speaking of earning, Elizabeth turned to address the table at large. "Did you know she refused to sign a prenup? Probably hoping to claim half of Thomas's fortune when—" "That's enough, Mom," Thomas cut in sharply. "I chose not to have a prenup because I trust my wife, and I'd appreciate it if he'd show her some respect." Elizabeth's face hardened. "Respect? She's a night shift nurse who married way above her station. The only thing I respect is your father's and my judgment in knowing this marriage won't last." The room fell silent. Even Elizabeth's sycophants looked uncomfortable. I stood up slowly, my pager conveniently buzzing at that moment. "I meet at the hospital," I said calmly. "Thank you for dinner, Elizabeth." Running away again, she called after me. "I suppose that's what happens when you know you don't belong." Thomas started to follow me, but I gestured for him to stay. Finish dinner with your family, I said softly. We'll talk later. As I drove back to the hospital, I thought about tomorrow's board meeting, about the changes that would sweep through Metropolitan Memorial once the acquisition was announced, about Elizabeth's face when she realized who really belonged in the healthcare world. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Everything's set for tomorrow. Board meets at 9 a.m. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather's wisdom about character and power. Elizabeth Winters was about to learn that true worth isn't measured by family names or social status. It's measured by how you treat people when you think you have all the power. And tomorrow, the balance of power was going to shift dramatically. The next morning, I arrived at Metropolitan Memorial wearing a tailored channel suit instead of scrubs. The security guard did a double take. He'd never seen the quiet night nurse dressed like this before. Morning, Joe, I greeted him as usual. How's Annie doing with her college applications? He beamed. Got accepted to nursing school just like she wanted, though with these tuition costs. I smiled, thinking of the employee education fund I'd already planned as part of the hospital's transformation. Something tells me things are about to get easier. The boardroom was on the top floor with sweeping views of Manhattan. Elizabeth was already there, holding court among her allies, probably plotting which nurses to berate today. She barely glanced at me as I walked in. I believe you're in the wrong place, she said dismissively. The nurses' station is on the second floor. Actually, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table, I'm exactly where I need to be. Before she could respond, my lawyer entered, followed by the hospital's current board members and several faces Elizabeth didn't recognize. Executives from my grandfather's healthcare company. What's going on? Elizabeth demanded. Who are these people, and why is she sitting there? Board Chairman Stevens cleared his throat. If everyone could take their seats, we have some significant announcements today. First, my lawyer began. I'd like to introduce the new owner of Metropolitan Memorial Hospital System, Dr. Grace Chen, CEO of Chen Healthcare International. The room went silent. Elizabeth's face turned an interesting shade of pale. This must be a joke, she stammered. Not at all, I said calmly, opening my portfolio. Chen Healthcare has acquired the entire metropolitan system. As of 9 a.m. this morning, we own all 15 hospitals, including this flagship facility. But you're a nurse, Elizabeth sputtered. I'm also a licensed physician with an MBA from Harvard and a PhD in healthcare administration. I corrected her. The night shift nursing work was part of my evaluation of hospital operations. My grandfather believed the best way to understand a healthcare system was from the ground up. I began distributing folders to the board members. Inside you'll find detailed reports on each department's performance over the past 2 years. You'll notice some concerning patterns in the surgical department. Elizabeth's hands shook as she opened her folder. There it all was, the documented evidence of her negligence, favoritism, and fraudulent billing practices. This is absurd, she protested. You can't just come in here and... Actually, I can, and I already have. I projected a graph onto the screen. Under your leadership, the surgical department's mortality rate has increased by 40%. Patient complaints have tripled. Junior staff turnover is at an all-time high. Those numbers are accurate, I cut in. I've had 2 years to gather data, Elizabeth. 2 years of night shifts watching how this hospital really runs. 2 years of documenting every incident you covered up, every qualified candidate you passed over because they didn't come from the right social circle, every procedure you billed for but delegated to residents. The board members were flipping through their folders, faces growing increasingly grave. Elizabeth's allies were suddenly very interested in their phones. Dr. Winters, Chairman Stevens said heavily, these allegations are extremely serious. They're more than allegations, I corrected. The state medical board has already been notified, as has the insurance commission regarding the fraudulent billing. Elizabeth stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. You planned this. All those nights working as a nurse, pretending to be some worthless nobody, you were spying on us. No, Elizabeth, I was doing exactly what you said I did, changing bedpans, assisting in surgeries, caring for patients. I just happened to be paying attention while doing it. I turned to address the full board. Metropolitan Memorial was once the best hospital in New York. My grandfather started his career here as a janitor. He believed in building healthcare systems that served everyone, regardless of their social status or connections. The next hour was a blur of revelations and resignations. Elizabeth was suspended pending investigation. Several of her allies quickly followed. By noon, the hospital's leadership had been completely restructured. But this wasn't just about revenge, it was about transformation. Moving forward, I announced, we're implementing comprehensive changes. Every employee will receive full education benefits. Salary structures will be equalized across departments. Patient care metrics will be transparent and publicly available. I glanced at Joe, the security guard, through the glass doors. And we're establishing a $50 million employee education fund, effective immediately. After the meeting, I found Elizabeth in her office, packing her things. Why? She demanded. Why work as a nurse when you own the whole company? Because that's how you learn what a hospital really needs, I replied. Not from quarterly reports or charity galas, but from the people who do the actual work of saving lives. Does Thomas know? She asked quietly. He does now. I turned to find my husband standing in the doorway, still in his Goldman Sachs suit. The board chairman called me, he said, looking between us, said I should know what happened. Thomas, darling, Elizabeth began, but he held up his hand. 2 years, Mom, 2 years you've belittled and insulted my wife, calling her worthless, treating her like she was beneath us. And all that time, she was working night shifts, not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand how to make things better. I was trying to protect you, Elizabeth protested. No, he corrected her. You were proving exactly why Grace needed to see how this place really ran. Because people like you care more about status than saving lives. 6 months later, Metropolitan Memorial had been transformed. The mortality rate plummeted. Staff satisfaction soared. The education fund had already helped 30 employees, including Joe's daughter, pursue advanced degrees. I kept working occasional night shifts, now officially as both CEO and nurse. It helped me stay connected to what mattered most, the actual care of patients. Elizabeth occasionally appears at medical conferences, usually criticizing modern hospital management. Meanwhile, Metropolitan Memorial has become a model for healthcare reform, featured in medical journals worldwide. Thomas supported every change, proudly watching as I rebuilt his mother's kingdom into something more valuable. A true community healthcare system. The worthless night nurse had transformed not just a hospital, but an entire approach to medical care. And every time I passed my grandfather's old janitor's closet, now converted into a staff relaxation room, I remember his wisdom. True worth isn't in titles or social status. It's in how you treat people when no one knows who you really are. As for the Winters family dinners, we still attend occasionally, but now I wear my scrubs proudly. After all, they're the uniform of someone who knows the real value of healthcare isn't measured in social status or family names. It's measured in lives saved, people helped, and systems changed for the better. Even if that change comes from someone they once thought was just a night shift nurse.